The stars looked cold from the bridge of the cargo ship New Dawn. Captain Jake Morrison stared out at the empty space between worlds and wondered if his grandfather would recognize what humanity had become. 50 years ago, humans had reached for the stars with hope. Now they crawled between planets like beaten dogs. Jake pressed a button on his control panel. The ship's engines hummed as they changed course toward Haven's Rest, another delivery of supplies to another human colony that existed only because their alien masters allowed it. The Kitherans had rules for everything. What humans could build, where they could go, how many children they could have. Break the rules and entire worlds burned. His first officer, a young woman named Amy Price, walked onto the bridge carrying a datapad. Her face looked tired. Everyone looked tired these days. "The cargo manifest is ready, Captain," she said. "Medical. Supplies for Haven's Rest. Some food packages from Earth Colony 7, and the usual industrial equipment." The Kitherans ordered. Jake nodded. The Kitherans always came first. Human colonies got whatever was left over. That was how it worked in the Empire. The crystal-skinned aliens ruled over 200 worlds, and they kept order through simple terror. Step out of line and die. Sometimes entire planets died just to make a point. Haven's Rest appeared on the ship's view screen as they approached. It looked peaceful from space. Green fields stretched across the continents. Small cities dotted the landscape. Jake knew better than to trust appearances. Every human colony had orbital weapons pointed at it. One wrong move and those green fields would turn to glass dot. The radio crackled to life. "New Dawn, this is Haven's Rest Control. You are cleared to land at Pad 7. Welcome back, Captain Morrison." Jake recognized the voice. Ben Palmer, the colony administrator. A good man trying to keep his people alive in impossible times. Jake had known Ben for 5 years, ever since he started running supply routes to Haven's Rest. Ben had a wife who worked as a doctor and a little girl who always waved at the ships when they landed. The New Dawn settled onto the landing pad with a soft thud. Jake could see people gathering to unload the cargo. They moved quickly but carefully. The Kitherans did not like delays. Jake walked down the cargo ramp and found Ben Palmer waiting for him. The man looked older than his 40 years. Running a colony under alien rule aged people fast. Ben's brown hair had gray streaks that had not been there last year. His eyes held the careful look of someone who had learned to expect trouble. "Good to see you again, Jake," Ben said, shaking hands. "How are things out there?" Jake looked around before answering. You never knew who might be listening. "Same as always. Quiet, controlled." He paused. "How are things here?" Ben's face darkened. "We need to talk, but not here." They walked toward the colony's main building. Haven's Rest looked like any human settlement. Simple buildings designed to be efficient rather than beautiful. Solar panels on every roof. Gardens between the houses where people grew what food they could. Children played in the streets, but even they played quietly. Everyone had learned to be quiet. Ben led Jake to his office and closed the door. The room was small and plain. Desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out at the fields. On the desk sat a picture of Ben's family. His wife Lisa smiled from the photo, her arm around their 8-year-old daughter Lucy. "The Kitherans are demanding more grain," Ben said without sitting down. 20% more than last year. Jake felt his stomach tighten. "Can you do it?" "Not without starving our own people." Ben walked to the window and stared out at the fields. "We barely had enough food last winter. If we give them 20% more, we won't make it through the next one." "What are you going to do?" Ben turned back to Jake. His face looked determined in a way that scared Jake. "I'm going to file a formal complaint. Under Imperial law, we have the right to petition for reasonable quotas. Jake stared at him. Ben, you can't be serious. I am serious. The law says we can petition. It's right there in the Imperial Charter. The law also says they can execute you for breathing wrong if they want to. Jake stood up. Ben, think about what you're doing. Think about Lisa and Lucy. I am thinking about them. Ben's voice grew harder. I'm thinking about all the children on this world. What kind of life are we giving them? What kind of future? Jake had heard this kind of talk before. It usually ended with funerals. The Kitherans don't negotiate. They don't compromise. They rule through fear because fear works. Maybe it's time someone tested that. Before Jake could answer, the door opened. A small girl with blonde hair ran into the room. Lucy Palmer had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a toy spaceship. Daddy, is that Captain Norrison? She asked, looking at Jake with curious eyes. Ben's expression softened immediately. Yes, sweetheart. Say hello. Lucy walked up to Jake and held out her small hand. Hello, Captain. Thank you for bringing us supplies. Jake shook her hand gently. You're very welcome, Lucy. How old are you now? 8 3/4, she said seriously. I want to be a spaceship captain like you when I grow up. That's a fine dream, Jake said, though his heart ached it. The words. Human children were not allowed to pilot ships in the Empire. The Kitherans made sure of that. Lucy hugged her father and ran back out of the room. Ben watched her go with eyes full of love and fear. She deserves better than this, Ben said quietly. Jake understood. Every parent in human space felt the same way, but understanding did not change reality. The Kitherans had weapons that could crack planets. Humans had farming tools and cargo ships. Ben, please, don't do this. Find another way. Ben Palmer looked out the window again at the fields his people worked and the sky where alien ships watched. There is no other way, Jake. Not anymore. 2 days later, Ben Palmer filed his formal petition with the Kitheran governor. Jake left. Haven's Rest with a sick feeling in his stomach and the memory of a little girl who wanted to fly among the stars. He did not know it would be the last time he would see Lucy Palmer alive. The Kitheran dreadnought arrived at Haven's Rest 3 days after Ben Palmer filed his petition. It dropped out of hyperspace like a mountain of black metal and crystal, blotting out the sun as it moved into orbit. The ship was 5 kilometers long and bristled with enough weapons to destroy continents. On the planet below, people stopped working and looked up at the sky. Children pointed at the dark shape hanging above them. Adults grabbed their children and pulled them inside. Everyone knew what a terror ship meant. Jake Morrison was halfway to the Titan mining colonies when he got the emergency broadcast. All human ship captains were ordered to monitor Subspace Channel 7. Jake's hands shook as he changed the frequency. He knew what was coming. He had seen it before. The face that appeared on his screen made his blood freeze. Fleet Commander. Zexthal looked like all Kitherans, but worse. His crystal skin was darker than most, almost black in places. His eyes glowed with a cold blue light that seemed to look right through whatever he was staring at. When he spoke, his voice sounded like breaking glass. Humans of Haven's Rest have violated Imperial law, Zexthal said. His words came out slow and clear. They have questioned the wisdom of their betters. They have forgotten their place in the order of things. Jake wanted to turn off the broadcast, but he could not look away. Neither could millions of other humans across the galaxy. The Kitherans always made sure everyone watched when they made examples. The penalty for such arrogance is death, the alien commander continued. 50 colonists will be executed. This will be broadcast to all human worlds, so you may remember what happens to those who forget their place. The view changed to show the main square of Haven's Rest. 50 people stood in a line facing a squad of Kitharan soldiers, men and women, of all ages. Jake recognized some of them from his visits to the colony. Tom the mechanic who always fixed his ship for free, Mary the teacher who ran the colony school, Old Pete who grew the best vegetables on the planet. Ben Palmer stood among them. He had volunteered to take someone else's place, just like Jake knew he would. The man looked scared but determined. His eyes searched the crowd until they found his wife and daughter. Lisa Palmer held Lucy close, both of them crying. Zexthil appeared again on the screen. His crystal face showed no emotion at all. Your administrator believed he could petition the Empire. He believed your laws meant something. Let me show you what your petitions are worth. Jake expected the execution to begin. 50 people would die, and that would be the end of it. A horrible end, but still the end. The Kitharans usually kept their examples simple, but Zexthil had something else in mind. Your death means nothing to them, he said, speaking directly to Ben Palmer. Adults die every day, but this will break their spirits forever. The alien soldiers moved through the crowd of 50 people. They pushed most of them aside, leaving only 5 still standing in the line. Jake's heart stopped when he saw who they were. All children. The youngest looked maybe 6 years old. The oldest was Lucy Palmer. No, Jake whispered at his screen. No, you can't. But they could. The Kitharans had ruled through terror for 1,000 years. They knew exactly how to break a species. Ben Palmer tried to run to his daughter, but crystal-skinned guards held him back. Lisa Palmer screamed and fought to reach Lucy, but more guards stopped her. The little girl looked around with wide, frightened eyes. She did not understand what was happening. This is what happens when you question the Empire, Zexthil announced. To the galaxy, this is the price of your pride. Lucy Palmer looked toward her parents. Even from far away, Jake could see she was trying to be brave. The 8-year-old girl stood straight and did not cry, though tears ran down her face. Tell my daddy I was brave, she called out in a small voice that somehow carried across the square and through the broadcast to every human world. The energy. Weapons fired. Jake turned off his screen and threw up. Across human space, millions of people did the same. But they had all seen it. That was the point. The Kitharans wanted everyone to see what happened when humans got ideas above their station. On Haven's Rest, Ben Palmer fell to his knees. His wife collapsed beside him. The other parents screamed and wept. The crowd stood in shocked silence, staring at 5 small bodies in the square. Zexthil's voice continued the broadcast. Let this be a lesson to all humans. Obey, serve. Not think, do not question. Do not dream of more than we allow you. This is the natural order. The transmission ended. The Kitharan dreadnought stayed in orbit for 3 more days, making sure the lesson was understood. Then it jumped to hyperspace and vanished, leaving Haven's Rest to bury its children and remember its place. But something had changed in those 3 days. Something the Kitharans did not expect and could not measure. On the mining station in the Titan Belt, Dr. Alex Carter stared at the wall of his quarters, where he had scratched the names of the 5 dead children. His hands shook not with fear, but with rage. Alex had been an engineer in the old Earth military before the conquest. He knew about weapons. He knew about explosives. Most importantly, he knew about revenge. On the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, factory supervisor Maria Santos called her workers together. They had all seen the broadcast. They had all watched children die for asking for enough food to survive the winter. Maria looked at her people and saw the same cold anger in their eyes that burned in her own heart. We're not making industrial equipment anymore, she told them quietly. We're making weapons. On the prison world of Alcatraz 7, Warden Paul, Murphy opened the maximum security cells for the first time in 20 years. The most dangerous criminals in human space looked at him with surprise and suspicion. The Empire just murdered 5 children on live broadcast, Paul told them. Anyone who wants a chance to pay them back, step forward. Every single prisoner stepped forward. Across the galaxy, humans watched the recording again and again. Lucy. Palmer's last words spread through underground networks faster than the Kitherans could stop them. Tell my daddy I was brave. The Empire thought they had delivered the perfect lesson in terror. Instead, they had made a mistake that would echo across the stars. They had given humanity something to fight for. Jake Morrison changed course and headed back toward Haven's Rest. His cargo hold was full of supplies, but he did not care about supplies anymore. He cared about a little girl who had wanted to be a spaceship captain and would never grow up to fly among the stars. The Kitherans had ruled through terror for 1,000 years, but they had never dealt with humans who had nothing left to lose. That was about to change. Dr. Alex Carter had not slept in 3 days. He sat in the machine shop of Mining Station 12, surrounded by tools and explosive charges meant for breaking apart asteroids. But Alex was not thinking about mining anymore. He was thinking about turning mining equipment into weapons of war. The recording played on his tablet for the 100th time. 5 children falling to Kitheran energy weapons. Lucy Palmer's small voice saying she was brave. Alex paused the video and stared at the little girl's face. She looked like his daughter would have looked if the Kitherans had not sterilized his wife during the conquest. Alex picked up a mining charge and turned it over in his hands. The explosive was designed to crack open asteroids so the miners could reach the valuable metals inside. But Alex saw something different. He saw a warhead that could punch through the hull of a Kitheran patrol ship. His tablet buzzed with an encrypted message. Alex had been part of the underground resistance for years, passing information and hiding supplies. But this message was different. It was not asking him to hide something or carry a secret. It was asking him to build weapons. The message was short. Mining equipment can be modified. We need kinetic launchers. How many can you build? Alex looked around his workshop. The mining station had tons of equipment. Electromagnetic launchers for shooting survey probes. Refinement plants that could process raw materials into any shape needed. Most importantly, it had miners who had just watched children die on live broadcast. Alex typed back a single word. Hundreds. On the ocean world of Pacifica, Commander Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of a fishing boat and looked out at a fleet of similar vessels. 50 boats bobbed in the evening waves, their crews waiting for orders. To any Kitheran patrol, they looked like simple fishing ships, heading out for the night catch. The Kitherans had never bothered to monitor human fishing fleets. Fish were not important to the crystal-skinned aliens. They ate energy, not food. So they ignored the small human boats that moved across the oceans of their agricultural worlds. That had been a mistake. Kate pressed a button on her radio. Across the fleet, hidden weapon systems came online. The fishing boats were actually converted military vessels from before the conquest. Kate had spent 5 years secretly modifying them in hidden underwater bases. Their hulls were reinforced. Their engines were upgraded, and they carried enough firepower to take on a Kitheran destroyer. All ships, this is Sullivan. Kate spoke into her radio. You all saw the broadcast. You all know why we're here. Tonight we stop pretending to be fishermen. The acknowledgments came back from 50 captains, men and women who had served in Earth's Navy before the conquest. People who had been forced to catch fish instead of defending their worlds. People who had waited 5 years for this moment. Target is the patrol ship Glory of Kithara, currently orbiting Pacifica Station. They think we're no threat. Let's show How wrong they are. The fishing fleet turned toward their target, engines churning white foam in the dark water dot. Meanwhile, on the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, Maria Santos walked through her factory with a checklist in her hand. Her workers had been busy for 3 days, ever since they watched Lucy Palmer die. The assembly line that used to make farming equipment now produced something very different. How many mass drivers are ready? Maria asked her foreman, a big man, named Carl Murphy, who used to build spacecraft before the conquest. 12 complete units, Carl replied. Another 8 almost finished. We're installing them in cargo containers, so they look like normal freight shipments. Maria nodded. The mass drivers were simple weapons. They used magnetic fields to accelerate metal projectiles to extremely high speeds. Nothing fancy, but effective. A chunk of iron moving at several kilometers per second could punch through most armor. What about the targeting systems? Danny Walsh finished programming them yesterday. They can lock onto any ship, broadcasting Kithaeron identification codes. Maria smiled grimly. Danny Walsh was a computer programmer who had been forced to write inventory software for the past 10 years. Now he was writing targeting programs for weapons designed to kill the aliens who had conquered his world. Good. Start loading them onto cargo ships. I want them distributed to every human colony with a spaceport. On Haven's Rest, Ben Palmer sat beside his daughter's grave and stared up at the stars. 3 days had passed since the execution. 3 days since he had watched his little girl die because he thought petitions and laws could change anything. His wife, Lisa, sat beside him, leaning against his shoulder. Neither of them had spoken much since the funeral. What was there to say? Their daughter was dead because Ben had been stupid enough to believe in justice. I should have known, Ben said quietly. I should have known they would hurt her. Lisa squeezed his hand. You couldn't have known they would murder children. I should have. That's what they do. That's all they've ever done. Ben looked at the small marker that bore Lucy's name. She wanted to be a spaceship captain. I remember. She'd never get the chance now. They sat in silence for a while, watching the alien stars that ruled over human space. Finally, Lisa spoke. Jake Morrison came by today while you were working. Ben looked at her. What did he want? He wanted to know if we'd heard from the resistance. Ben felt something cold move through his chest. What did you tell him? I told him we weren't the kind of people who joined resistance movements. And what did he say? Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, a communication unit with encryption capabilities. He said maybe it was time to become that kind of people. Ben stared at the device. Using it would mean crossing a line he could never uncross. It would mean admitting that petitions and laws were meaningless. It would mean choosing violence over peace. It would mean making sure Lucy's death meant something. Ben took the communication unit from his wife's hand and turned it on. Across human space, the spark that had started with 5 dead children was growing into something larger. On prison worlds, criminals were being released to fight for redemption. On mining stations, engineers were building weapons from industrial equipment. On ocean worlds, fishing fleets were preparing for war. The Kithaerons had ruled through terror. For 1,000 years, they had crushed hundreds of rebellions by making examples of entire worlds. They understood fear. They understood oppression. But they did not understand what happened when you pushed a species beyond fear and into pure rage. They did not understand that some things were worse than death. They did not understand that parents who had lost their children had nothing left to lose. The underground resistance networks that had been passing information for 50 years suddenly found themselves flooded with new members. Not just the usual rebels and outcasts, but teachers and doctors and engineers and farmers. Normal people who had decided that watching children die on live broadcast was the final line in the sand. The Kitherans thought they had delivered a perfect lesson in terror. Instead, they had lit a fuse that ran to explosives placed throughout human space over 50 years of occupation. The fuse was burning now, and nothing could stop it. In his quarters on the New Dawn, Captain Jake Morrison studied star charts and shipping schedules. He was planning routes between human worlds, but not for delivering cargo. He was planning a network that could move weapons and people without attracting Kitheran attention. His ship's computer specialist, Amy Price, looked up from her console. "I've established secure communication links with 17 resistance cells. They're all asking the same question, which is, when do we start fighting back?" Jake looked out at the stars and thought about a little girl who had wanted to fly spaceships. "Soon," he said, "very soon." The war began without warning on 17 worlds at exactly the same moment. On Mining Station 12, Dr. Alex Carter watched through his telescope as the first of his kinetic projectiles struck the Kitheran patrol ship Dark Victory. The mining charges he had converted into warheads punched through the alien vessel's crystal armor like bullets through glass. The ship broke apart in a shower of sparks and debris. "Target destroyed," Alex reported into his radio. Around him, miners who had spent decades breaking apart asteroids cheered as they watched their oppressors burn in space. On Pacifica, Commander Kate Sullivan's fishing fleet rose from the ocean on hidden repulsor systems, revealing their true nature as combat vessels. 50 ships that had pretended to catch fish for 5 years opened fire on the Kitheran orbital station. Energy beams and projectile weapons lit up the night sky. "This is for Lucy Palmer," Kate said as her ship's main gun fired. The energy beam cut through the station's hull like a sword through paper. On New Pittsburgh, Maria Santos stood in her factory control room and pressed a button. Across the industrial world, mass drivers disguised as cargo containers activated simultaneously. Hundreds of metal projectiles launched into space at incredible speeds, targeting every Kitheran ship in the system. But the most shocking attack came from an unexpected source. On the prison world of Alcatraz 7, the most dangerous criminals. In human space, it spent 3 days turning the prison into a fortress. When the Kitheran guards came to investigate reports of unrest, they found the gates wide open and the prisoners gone. What they found instead was hell itself. Murphy had given every inmate a choice: die in their cells or die fighting for something that mattered. The criminals had chosen to fight, and they fought with a viciousness that shocked even the Kitherans. Men and women who had spent their lives hurting other humans turned their skills against the aliens who had murdered children. The attacks were coordinated by Jake Morrison from his cargo ship, which had become a mobile command center. His computer specialist, Amy Price, had created a communication network that allowed instant contact between all the resistance cells. For the first time in 50 years, humans were fighting back with organization and purpose. "Phoenix Base, this is Morrison," Jake spoke into his radio. "What's your status?" "This is Ben Palmer at Phoenix Base," came the reply from Haven's Rest. "The Kitheran garrison is under siege. We have them trapped in their compound." Jake smiled. Grimly, Ben Palmer had transformed from a peaceful administrator into a resistance leader in just 1 week. The man who had tried to use petitions and laws now commanded a force of farmers, armed with improvised weapons and burning hatred. "Good work, Phoenix. What about the civilians?" "Safe in the underground shelters. The children are asking when they can help fight." Jake's smile faded. The children of Haven's Rest had watched their friends die on live broadcast. Now they wanted revenge. The Kitherans had created a generation of humans who would never forgive and never forget. "Keep the children safe, Phoenix. This is their fight too, but not yet." The resistance had advantages the Kitherans never expected. 50 years of occupation had given humans time to study their enemies. Dr. Lisa Palmer, working with Resistance, scientists across human space, had discovered something crucial about Kitharan biology. The aliens? Crystal-based bodies were incredibly strong and resistant to most weapons. But crystals had one weakness. They could shatter if hit with the right frequency of vibration. Lisa had developed sonic weapons that could literally shake Kitharan soldiers apart at the molecular level. All units, this is Phoenix Medical, Lisa. Palmer broadcast to the Resistance Network. Sonic disruptors are now available. Frequency 773.4 will cause immediate structural collapse in Kitharan crystal matrices. The information spread through the Resistance in minutes. On dozens of worlds, human engineers began building sonic weapons from communications, equipment, and industrial machinery. The Kitharan's greatest strength became their fatal weakness, but the humans' most devastating weapon was not technological. It was psychological. Every Resistance broadcast began the same way, with the recording of Lucy Palmer's execution. 5 children falling to energy weapons. A little girl's voice saying she was brave. Then came the message that struck fear into Kitharan hearts across the galaxy. This is the human resistance. You murdered our children. Now you will pay the price. The Kitharans had ruled through terror for 1,000 years, but they had never experienced terror themselves. They had never faced an enemy that fought not for conquest or resources, but for pure vengeance. They had never dealt with opponents who were willing to die just to make their enemies suffer. On the Kitharan homeworld, High Commander Veximer stared at the tactical displays showing human uprisings across the galaxy. Red markers indicated resistance activity on over 100 worlds. Yellow markers showed communication blackouts where they had lost contact with their forces entirely. How is this possible? Veximer demanded of his subordinates. They are a primitive species. They have no weapons, no organization, no military capacity. They are using industrial equipment as weapons, reported his intelligence chief. Mining charges as warheads, mass drivers as artillery, fishing boats as warships. Fishing boats? Veximer's crystal form flickered with disbelief. The humans have been secretly converting civilian vessels for 50 years. We never monitored them because we considered fishing boats beneath our notice. Veximer felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. The Empire had conquered 200 worlds by making examples of rebellious populations. Fear had always been enough to maintain control. But the humans were not showing fear. They were showing something far more dangerous. What do they want? Veximer asked. His intelligence chief hesitated. Revenge, sir. They broadcast the execution footage before every attack. They are fighting for the 5 children killed on Haven's Rest. 5 children? We have killed millions of their kind over the decades. Why do these 5 matter? The intelligence chief had no answer. The Kitharans understood conquest and submission. They understood fear and obedience. They did not understand that sometimes a single act of cruelty could transform an entire species. On Haven's Rest, Ben Palmer stood on the roof of the Colony Administration building and watched Kitharan ships burning in the sky. His daughter's grave was visible from where he stood, marked by a simple stone that bore her name and age: Lucy Palmer. 8 years old. She was brave. Ben had read those words every day since the funeral. Now he read them again as enemy ships exploded overhead like deadly fireworks. You were right, sweetheart, he whispered to the grave. You were braver than any of us. The war was spreading faster than either side could control. Human resistance cells that had waited 50 years for their moment were emerging from hiding. Weapons that had been secretly built and stockpiled were finally being used. Most importantly, humans who had learned to live in fear were remembering how to fight. Jake Morrison, received reports from across human space as his ship moved between battle zones. The resistance was winning, but the cost was enormous. Entire colonies were being destroyed rather than surrender to human control. Kitharan commanders were choosing to glass worlds rather than admit defeat, but the humans kept fighting. They fought for Lucy Palmer and the 4 other children who had died with her. They fought for 50 years of oppression and humiliation. They fought for the future they wanted their children to have got, and for the first time in 1,000 years, they all... Kitharan Empire was afraid. Fleet Commander Zexthel stared at the tactical display in his command center aboard the terror ship Absolute. What he saw made no sense. Haven's Rest, the agricultural world where he had executed 5 human children to make an example, was now surrounded by a fleet of human warships. "How many ships?" he asked his tactical officer. "Over 300, sir. They appeared from hyperspace simultaneously 20 minutes ago." Zexthel's crystal form flickered with confusion. "Impossible. Humans do not have 300 warships. We destroyed their fleet 50 years ago. These appear to be converted civilian vessels, sir. Cargo ships, mining barges, fishing boats. But they are heavily armed." Zexthel looked closer at the display. The human fleet was arranged in perfect formation around his ship. They had him surrounded, but they were not attacking. They were waiting. Are they trying to surrender? No, sir. They are broadcasting a message. Zexthel activated the communication system. The face that appeared on his screen made his crystal skin darken with recognition. Captain Jake Morrison, the human cargo pilot who had been visiting Haven's Rest for years. But Morrison looked different now. His eyes held a cold hatred that seemed to burn through the screen. "Fleet Commander Zexthel," Morrison said. His voice was calm and steady. "Do you remember me? You are the cargo pilot. You have no authority to. I have the authority of every human parent who watched you murder our children." Morrison interrupted. "I have the authority of 50 years of oppression. And I have the authority of this fleet that has you surrounded." Zexthel looked at his weapon systems. Even with his terror ship's massive firepower, he was outnumbered 100 to 1. But Kitharans did not negotiate with inferior species. "You cannot defeat the Empire," Zexthel declared. "We will send more ships. We will burn your worlds to glass." Morrison's expression did not change. "Your empire is already falling. In the past week, we have liberated over 200 human worlds. Your terror fleets are being destroyed faster than you can replace them. And it all started here with a little girl who wanted to be a spaceship captain." The display in Morrison's background changed to show the main square of Haven's Rest, the same square where Lucy Palmer and 4 other children had been executed. But now it was different. A memorial stood where the children had died. 5 small statues holding hands, with their names carved in stone below. "You wanted to teach us about terror," Morrison continued. "You wanted to break our spirits by murdering innocents. But you made one mistake. You forgot that terror works both ways." More ships appeared on Zexthel's sensors. Not human vessels, but Kitharan ones. His own reinforcements were arriving, but something was wrong. The ships were broadcasting human identification codes. "Those are stolen Kitharan vessels," Morrison explained. "Captured by human crews who learned everything they could about your technology while serving as slaves on your ships. Did you think we were just sitting quietly for 50 years? We were studying you, learning your weaknesses, waiting for the right moment." On the surface of Haven's Rest, Ben Palmer stood in the memorial square surrounded by his people. The entire colony had gathered to watch the battle in space. Children who had survived the massacre looked up at the sky where human ships surrounded their oppressor. "Lucy would have loved this," Lisa Palmer said, standing beside her husband. She held a sonic disruptor in her hands, one of the weapons she had helped design to kill Kitherans. She always wanted to see humans fighting back. Ben nodded. His daughter's grave was just a few meters away, marked by one of the 5 statues. The little girl who had been executed for his courage was finally getting her revenge. The battle began when Zexthil's reinforcements opened fire on the human fleet. But the humans were ready. 50 years of secret preparation had given them weapons the Kitherans never suspected. Kinetic projectiles launched from asteroid mining stations struck with the force of small nuclear weapons. Sonic disruptors tuned to shatter crystal matrices turned proud Kitheran warriors into dust. Most devastating of all were the psychological warfare broadcasts that preceded every attack. "This is for Lucy Palmer," came the voice over every communication channel. "This is for Stephen Walsh. This is for Maria Santos. This is for Tommy Chun. This is for Beth Murphy." The names of the 5 murdered children were spoken before every human attack. Kitheran soldiers who had never known fear found themselves shaking as they heard the list repeated over and over. They began to understand what their empire had created when it chose to murder innocents. The Battle of Haven's Rest lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Kitheran fleet was destroyed. Zexthol's terror ship drifted in space, its hull cracked open like a broken egg. The fleet commander, who had executed 5 children to make a point, was dead, killed by weapons built from farming equipment and mining tools. But the victory at Haven's Rest was just the beginning. Across the galaxy, human resistance forces were emerging from decades of hiding. The revelation that the supposedly primitive humans had been secretly building weapons and studying their enemies for 50 years sent shockwaves through the Kitheran Empire. On the Kitheran homeworld, High Commander Vexamer received reports from across the galaxy. Over half of the Empire's worlds were in open rebellion. Terror fleets that had maintained order for centuries were being destroyed by enemies they had dismissed as harmless. "How do we stop them?" Vexamer asked his war council. "We could use the planet crackers," suggested one general. "Destroy every human world at once. That would eliminate billions of workers and soldiers we need for other campaigns. Then we negotiate," said another general. "Offer them independence in exchange for peace." Vexamer's crystal form flared with anger. "The Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. We rule through strength and terror." "But terror no longer works on them," the general replied quietly. "They are not afraid of us anymore." That was the truth the Kitheran Empire could not accept. For 1,000 years, they had ruled through fear. They had crushed rebellions by making examples of entire worlds. The threat of overwhelming retaliation had kept hundreds of species in line, but the humans were different. They had been pushed beyond fear into something far more dangerous. They fought not for conquest or freedom, but for pure vengeance. They were willing to die just to hurt their enemies. They turned every weapon against them, even their own bodies if necessary. The war reached its climax when the combined human resistance fleet arrived at the Kitheran capital system. 5,000 ships that had once been cargo vessels, mining barges, and fishing boats now carried enough firepower to crack planets. They were led by Jake Morrison and a captured Kitheran dreadnought renamed Vengeance. The final battle was not decided by superior technology or tactics. It was decided by the simple fact that humans had nothing left to lose, while Kitherans, for the first time in their history, were afraid to die. When the Kitheran capital fell, human forces found something they had not expected. In the Imperial archives, they discovered recordings of thousands of executions carried out over the centuries. Millions of beings from hundreds of worlds had died to maintain the Empire's rule through terror, but none of those deaths had sparked the kind of rebellion that 5 human children had caused. None of those species had fought back with the relentless fury that humanity had shown. Standing in the ruins of the Kitheran capital, Jake Morrison transmitted a message to every human world. Behind him, the crystal spires of the Imperial Palace. "Earned against an alien sky, the war is over," he announced. "The Kithaeron Empire has fallen. Our children can grow up free." On Haven's Rest, Ben Palmer stood beside his daughter's grave as he listened to the broadcast. Lisa held his hand as they watched alien ships fleeing their solar system. Around them, the people of Haven's Rest celebrated their liberation. She would have been 9 years old next month, Ben said quietly. "She would have loved seeing this," Lisa replied. "Humans flying among the stars again." Ben nodded and looked up at the sky where human ships were already beginning to explore the galaxy that was now theirs to claim. The Kithaerons had ruled through terror for 1,000 years, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated what happens when you murder someone's child dot in the main square. The memorial to the 5 children stood unchanged. 5 small statues holding hands, with their names carved in stone. Lucy Palmer, Stephen Walsh, Maria Santos, Tommy Chun, Beth Murphy. The children whose deaths had brought down an empire dot at the base of Lucy's statue. Someone had added new words to the inscription. She was brave. And she was right. Humans do belong among the stars. The Kithaeron Empire was gone, defeated not by superior weapons or tactics, but by the simple truth that some prices are too high to pay. They had ruled through terror, but terror, once unleashed, could not be controlled dot, and sometimes the death of one innocent child could change the fate of the galaxy.